you knew things about her beforehand. She stopped. The room had grown profoundly still. A log dropped to the hearth and broke there in a hissing shower. Darrow spoke in a clear voice. "I knew nothing, absolutely nothing," he said. She had the answer to her inmost doubt, to her last shameful unavowed hope. She sat powerless under her woe. He walked to the fireplace and pushed back the broken log with his foot. A flame shot out of it, and in the upward glare she saw his pale face, stern with misery. "Is that all?" he asked. She made a slight sign with her head and he came slowly back to her. "Then is this to be goodbye?" Again she signed a faint assent, and he made no effort to touch her or draw nearer. "You understand that I shan't come back?" He was looking at her, and she tried to return his look, but her eyes were blind with tears, and in dread of his seeing them she got up and walked away. He did not follow her, and she stood with her back to him, staring at a bowl of carnations on a little table strewn with books. Her tears magnified everything she looked at, and the streaked petals of the carnations, their fringed edges and frail curled stamens, pressed upon her, huge and vivid. She noticed among the books a volume of verse he had sent her from England, and tried to remember whether it was before or after. She felt that he was waiting for her to speak, and at last she turned to him. "I shall see you tomorrow before you go." He made no answer. She moved toward the door and he held it open for her. She saw his hand on the door, and his seal ring in its setting of twisted silver, and the sense of the end of all things came to her. They walked down the drawing rooms, between the shadowy reflections of screens and cabinets, and mounted the stairs side by side. At the end of the gallery, a lamp brought out turbid gleams in the smoky battle-piece above it. On the landing Darrow stopped. His room was the nearest to the stairs. "Good night," he said, holding out his hand. As Anna gave him hers, the springs of grief broke loose in her. She struggled with her sobs, and subdued them, but her breath came unevenly, and to hide her agitation she leaned on him and pressed her face against his arm. Don't," he whispered, soothing her. Her troubled breathing sounded loudly in the silence of the sleeping house. She pressed her lips tight, but could not stop the nervous pulsations in her throat, and he put an arm about her and, opening his door, drew her across the threshold of his room. The door shut behind her and she sat down on the lounge at the foot of the bed. The pulsations in her throat had ceased, but she knew they would begin again if she tried to speak. Darrow walked away and leaned against the mantelpiece. The red-veiled lamp shone on his books and papers, on the armchair by the fire, and the scattered objects on his dressing table. A log glimmered on the hearth, and the room was warm and faintly smoke-scented. It was the first time she had ever been in a room he lived in, among his personal possessions and the traces of his daily usage. Every object about her seemed to contain a particle of himself. The whole air breathed of him, steeping her in the sense of his intimate presence. Suddenly she thought, this is what Sophie Viner knew, and with a torturing precision she pictured them alone in such a scene. Had he taken the girl to an hotel? Where did people go in such cases? Wherever they were, the silence of night had been around them, and the things he used had been strewn about the room. Anna, ashamed of dwelling on the detested vision, stood up with a confused impulse of flight. Then a wave of contrary feeling arrested her and she paused with lowered head. Darrow had come forward as she rose, and she perceived that he was waiting for her to bid him good night. It was clear that no other possibility had even brushed his mind, and the fact, for some dim reason, humiliated her. Why not? Why not? Something whispered in her, as though his forbearance, his tacit recognition of her pride, were a slight on other qualities she wanted him to feel in her. In the morning, then, she heard him say. Yes, in the morning, she repeated. She continued to stand in the same place, looking vaguely about the room. For once before they parted, since part they must, she longed to be to him all that Sophie Viner had been, but she remained rooted to the floor, unable to find a word or imagine a gesture that should express her meaning. Exasperated by her helplessness, she thought, "Don't I feel things as other women do?" Her eye fell on a note-case she had given him. It was worn at the corners with the friction of his pocket and distended with thickly packed papers. She wondered if he carried her letters in it, and she put her hand out and touched it. All that he and she had ever felt or seen, their close encounters of word and look, and the closer contact of their silences, trembled through her at the touch. She remembered things he had said that had been like new skies above her head, ways he had that seemed a part of the air she breathed. The faint warmth of her girlish love came back to her, gathering heat as it passed through her thoughts, and her heart rocked like a boat on the surge of its long memories. It's because I love him in too many ways, she thought, and slowly she turned to the door. She was aware that Darrow was still silently watching her, but he neither stirred nor spoke till she had reached the threshold. Then he met her there and caught her in his arms. "Not tonight, don't tell me tonight," he whispered, and she leaned away from him, closing her eyes for an instant, and then slowly opening them to the flood of light in his. Anna and Darrow, the next day, sat alone in a compartment of the Paris train. Anna, when they entered it, had put herself in the farthest corner and placed her bag on the adjoining seat. She had decided suddenly to accompany Darrow to Paris, had even persuaded him to wait for a later train in order that they might travel together. She had an intense longing to be with him, an almost morbid terror of losing sight of him for a moment. When he jumped out of the train and ran back along the platform to buy a newspaper for her, she felt as though she should never see him again, and shivered with the cold misery of her last journey to Paris, when she had thought herself parted from him forever. Yet she wanted to keep him at a distance, on the other side of the compartment, and as the train moved out of the station she drew from her bag the letters she had thrust in it as she left the house, and began to glance over them so that her lowered lids should hide her eyes from him. She was his now, his for life, there could never again be any question of sacrificing herself to Effie's welfare, or to any other abstract conception of duty. Effie of course would not suffer. Anna would pay for her bliss as a wife by redoubled devotion as a mother. Her scruples were not overcome, but for the time their voices were drowned in the tumultuous rumor of her happiness. As she opened her letters she was conscious that Darrow's gaze was fixed on her, and gradually it drew her eyes upward, and she drank deep of the passionate tenderness in his. Then the blood rose to her face and she felt again the desire to shield herself. She turned back to her letters and her glance lit on an envelope inscribed in Owen's hand. Her heart began to beat oppressively. She was in a mood when the simplest things seemed ominous. What could Owen have to say to her? Only the first page was covered, and it contained simply the announcement that, in the company of a young compatriot who was studying at the Beaux Arts, he had planned to leave for Spain the following evening. "He hasn't seen her, then," was Anna's instant thought, and her feeling was a strange compound of humiliation and relief. The girl had kept her word, lived up to the line of conduct she had set herself, and Anna had failed in the same attempt. She did not reproach herself with her failure, but she would have been happier if there had been less discrepancy between her words to Sophie Viner and the act which had followed them. It irritated her obscurely that the girl should have been so much surer of her power to carry out her purpose. Anna looked up and saw that Darrow's eyes were on the newspaper. He seemed calm and secure, almost indifferent to her presence. Will it become a matter of course to him so soon? She wondered with a twinge of jealousy. She sat motionless, her eyes fixed on him, trying to make him feel the attraction of her gaze as she felt his. It surprised and shamed her to detect a new element in her love for him, a sort of suspicious tyrannical tenderness that seemed to deprive it of all serenity. Finally he looked up, his smile enveloped her, and she felt herself his in every fiber, his so completely and inseparably that she saw the vanity of imagining any other fate for herself. To give herself a countenance she held out Owen's letter. He took it and glanced down the page, his face grown grave. She waited nervously till he looked up. "That's a good plan, the best thing that could happen," he said, a just perceptible shade of constraint in his tone. "Oh, yes," she hastily assented. She was aware of a faint current of relief silently circulating between them. They were both glad that Owen was going, that for a while he would be out of their way, and it seemed to her horrible that so much of the stuff of their happiness should be made of such unavowed feelings. "I shall see him this evening," she said, wishing Darrow to feel that she was not afraid of meeting her stepson. "Yes, of course, perhaps he might dine with you." The words struck her as strangely obtuse. Darrow was to meet his ambassador at the station on the latter's arrival, and would in all probability have to spend the evening with him, and Anna knew he had been concerned at the thought of having to leave her alone. But how could he speak in that careless tone of her dining with Owen? She lowered her voice to say, "I'm afraid he's desperately unhappy." He answered, with a tinge of impatience, "It's much the best thing that he should travel. Yes, but don't you feel, she broke off. She knew how he disliked these idle returns on the irrevocable, and her fear of doing or saying what he disliked was tinged by a new instinct of subserviency against which her pride revolted. She thought to herself, he will see the change, and grow indifferent to me as he did to her, and for a moment it seemed to her that she was reliving the experience of Sophie Viner. Darrow made no attempt to learn the end of her unfinished sentence. He handed back Owen's letter and returned to his newspaper, and when he looked up from it a few minutes later it was with a clear brow and a smile that irresistibly drew her back to happier thoughts. The train was just entering a station, and a moment later their compartment was invaded by a commonplace couple preoccupied with the bestowal of bulging packages. Anna, at their approach, felt the possessive pride of the woman in love when strangers are between herself and the man she loves. She asked Darrow to open the window, to place her bag in the net, to roll her rug into a cushion for her feet, and while he was thus busied with her she was conscious of a new devotion in his tone, in his way of bending over her and meeting her eyes. He went back to his seat, and they looked at each other like lovers smiling at a happy secret. Anna, before going back to Giver, had suggested Owen's moving into her apartment, but he had preferred to remain at the hotel to which he had sent his luggage, and on arriving in Paris she decided to drive there at once. She was impatient to have the meeting over, and glad that Darrow was obliged to leave her at the station in order to look up a colleague at the embassy. She dreaded his seeing Owen again, and yet dared not tell him so, and to ensure his remaining away she mentioned an urgent engagement with her dressmaker and a long list of commissions to be executed for Madame de Chantal. "I shall see you tomorrow morning," she said, but he replied with a smile that he would certainly find time to come to her for a moment on his way back from meeting the ambassador. And when he had put her in a cab he leaned through the window to press his lips to hers. She blushed like a girl, thinking, half vexed, half happy, yesterday he would not have done it, and a dozen scarcely definable differences in his look and manner seemed all at once to be summed up in the boyish act. After all, I'm engaged to him, she reflected, and then smiled at the absurdity of the word. The next instant, with a pang of self-reproach, she remembered Sophie Viner's cry, "I knew all the while he didn't care. Poor thing, oh poor thing." Anna murmured. At Owen's hotel she waited in a tremor while the porter went in search of him. Word was presently brought back that he was in his room and begged her to come up, and as she crossed the hall she caught sight of his portmanteau lying on the floor, already labelled for departure. Owen sat at a table writing, his back to the door, and when he stood up the window was behind him, so that, in the rainy afternoon light, his features were barely discernible. "Dearest, so you're really off," she said, hesitating a moment on the threshold. He pushed a chair forward, and they sat down, each waiting for the other to speak. Finally she put some random question about his traveling companion, a slow, shy, meditative youth whom he had once or twice brought down to Giver. She reflected that it was natural he should have given this uncommunicative comrade the preference over his livelier acquaintances, and aloud she said, "I'm so glad Fred Rempson can go with you." Owen answered in the same tone, and for a few minutes their talk dragged itself on over a dry waste of commonplaces. Anna noticed that, though ready enough to impart his own plans, Owen studiously abstained from putting any questions about hers. It was evident from his allusions that he meant to be away for some time, and he presently asked her if she would give instructions about packing and sending after him some winter clothes he had left at Giver. This gave her the opportunity to say that she expected to go back within a day or two and would attend to the matter as soon as she returned. She added, "I came up this morning with George, who is going on to London tomorrow, intending, by the use of Darrow's Christian name, to give Owen the chance to speak of her marriage." But he made no comment, and she continued to hear the name sounding on unfamiliarly between them. The room was almost dark, and she finally stood up and glanced about for the light switch, saying, "I can't see you, dear." "Oh, don't, I hate the light," Owen exclaimed, catching her by the wrist and pushing her back into her seat. He gave a nervous laugh and added, "I'm half blind with neuralgia. I suppose it's this beastly rain." "Yes, it will do you good to get down to Spain." She asked if he had the remedies the doctor had given him for a previous attack, and on his replying that he didn't know what he'd done with the stuff, she sprang up, offering to go to the chemist's. It was a relief to have something to do for him, and she knew from his "oh, thanks, would you," that it was a relief to him to have a pretext for not detaining her. His natural impulse would have been to declare that he didn't want any drugs, and would be all right in no time, and his acquiescence showed her how profoundly he felt the uselessness of their trying to prolong their talk. His face was now no more than a white blur in the dusk, but she felt its indistinctness as a veil drawn over aching intensities of expression. He knows," she said to herself, and wondered whether the truth had been revealed to him by some corroborative fact or by the sheer force of divination. He had risen also, and was clearly waiting for her to go, and she turned to the door, saying, "I'll be back in a moment." "Oh, don't come up again, please." He paused, embarrassed. "I mean, I may not be here. I've got to go and pick up Rempson, and see about some final things with him." She stopped on the threshold with a sinking heart. He meant this to be their leave-taking, then, and he had not even asked her when she was to be married, or spoken of seeing her again before she set out for the other side of the world. "Owen," she cried, and turned back. He stood mutely before her in the dimness. "You haven't told me how long you're to be gone." "How long?" "Oh, you see, that's rather vague. I hate definite dates, you know." He paused and she saw he did not mean to help her out. She tried to say, "You'll be here for my wedding," but could not bring the words to her lips. Instead she murmured, "In 6 weeks I shall be going too," and he rejoined, as if he had expected the announcement and prepared his answer, "Oh, by that time, very likely. At any rate, I won't say goodbye, she stammered, feeling the tears beneath her veil. No, no, rather not, he declared, but he made no movement, and she went up and threw her arms about him. You'll write me, won't you? Of course, of course. Her hands slipped down into his, and for a minute they held each other dumbly in the darkness. Then he gave a vague laugh and said, "It's really time to light up." He pressed the electric button with one hand while with the other he opened the door, and she passed out without daring to turn back, lest the light on his face should show her what she feared to see. Satana drove to the chemist's for Owen's remedy. On the way she stopped her cab at a bookshop, and emerged from it laden with literature. She knew what would interest Owen, and what he was likely to have read, and she had made her choice among the newest publications with the promptness of a discriminating reader. But on the way back to the hotel she was overcome by the irony of adding this mental panacea to the other. There was something grotesque and almost mocking in the idea of offering a judicious selection of literature to a man setting out on such a journey. He knows, she kept on repeating, and giving the porter the parcel from the chemist's she drove away without leaving the books. She went to her apartment, whither her maid had preceded her. There was a fire in the drawing room and the tea table stood ready by the hearth. The stormy rain beat against the uncurtained windows, and she thought of Owen, who would soon be driving through it to the station, alone with his bitter thoughts. She had been proud of the fact that he had always sought her help in difficult hours, and now, in the most difficult of all, she was the one being to whom he could not turn. Between them, henceforth, there would always be the wall of an insurmountable silence. She strained her aching thoughts to guess how the truth had come to him. Had he seen the girl, and had she told him? Instinctively, Anna rejected this conjecture. But what need was there of assuming an explicit statement, when every breath they had drawn for the last weeks had been charged with the imminent secret? As she looked back over the days since Darrow's first arrival at Giver, she perceived that at no time had anyone deliberately spoken, or anything been accidentally disclosed. The truth had come to light by the force of its irresistible pressure, and the perception gave her a startled sense of hidden powers, of a chaos of attractions and repulsions far beneath the ordered surfaces of intercourse. She looked back with melancholy derision on her old conception of life, as a kind of well-lit and well-policed suburb to dark places one need never know about. Here they were, these dark places, in her own bosom, and henceforth she would always have to traverse them to reach the beings she loved best. She was still sitting beside the untouched tea table when she heard Darrow's voice in the hall. She started up, saying to herself, "I must tell him that Owen knows," but when the door opened and she saw his face, still lit by the same smile of boyish triumph, she felt anew the uselessness of speaking. Had he ever supposed that Owen would not know? Probably, from the height of his greater experience, he had seen long since that all that happened was inevitable, and the thought of it, at any rate, was clearly not weighing on him now. He was already dressed for the evening, and as he came toward her he said, "The ambassador's booked for an official dinner and I'm free after all. Where shall we dine?" Anna had pictured herself sitting alone all the evening with her wretched thoughts, and the fact of having to put them out of her mind for the next few hours gave her an immediate sensation of relief. Already her pulses were dancing to the tune of Darrow's, and as they smiled at each other she thought, "Nothing can ever change the fact that I belong to him." "Where shall we dine?" he repeated gaily, and she named a well-known restaurant for which she had once heard him express a preference. But as she did so she fancied she saw a shadow on his face, and instantly she said to herself, it was there he went with her. "Oh, no, not there, after all," she interrupted herself, and now she was sure his color deepened. "Where shall it be, then?" She noticed that he did not ask the reason of her change, and this convinced her that she had guessed the truth, and that he knew she had guessed it. "He will always know what I am thinking, and he will never dare to ask me," she thought, and she saw between them the same insurmountable wall of silence as between herself and Owen, a wall of glass through which they could watch each other's faintest motions but which no sound could ever traverse. They drove to a restaurant on the boulevard, and there, in their intimate corner of the serried scene, the sense of what was unspoken between them gradually ceased to oppress her. He looked so light-hearted and handsome, so ingenuously proud of her, so openly happy at being with her, that no other fact could seem real in his presence. He had learned that the ambassador was to spend 2 days in Paris, and he had reason to hope that in consequence his own departure for London would be deferred. He was exhilarated by the prospect of being with Anna for a few hours longer, and she did not ask herself if his exhilaration were a sign of insensibility, for she was too conscious of his power of swaying her moods not to be secretly proud of affecting his. They lingered for some time over the fruit and coffee, and when they rose to go Darrow suggested that, if she felt disposed for the play, they were not too late for the second part of the program at one of the smaller theatres. His mention of the hour recalled Owen to her thoughts. She saw his train rushing southward through the storm, and, in a corner of the swaying compartment, his face, white and indistinct as it had loomed on her in the rainy twilight. It was horrible to be thus perpetually paying for her happiness. Darrow had called for a theatrical journal, and he presently looked up from it to say, "I hear the second play at the Athene is amusing." It was on Anna's lips to acquiesce, but as she was about to speak she wondered if it were not at the Athene that Owen had seen Darrow with Sophie Viner. She was not sure he had even mentioned the theatre, but the mere possibility was enough to darken her sky. It was hateful to her to think of accompanying Darrow to places where the girl had been with him. She tried to reason away this scruple. She even reminded herself with a bitter irony that whenever she was in Darrow's arms she was where the girl had been before her. But she could not shake off her superstitious dread of being with him in any of the scenes of the Parisian episode. She replied that she was too tired for the play, and they drove back to her apartment. At the foot of the stairs she half turned to wish him good night, but he appeared not to notice her gesture and followed her up to her door. "This is ever so much better than the theatre," he said as they entered the drawing room. She had crossed the room and was bending over the hearth to light the fire. She knew he was approaching her, and that in a moment he would have drawn the cloak from her shoulders and laid his lips on her neck, just below the gathered-up hair. These privileges were his, and, however deferently and tenderly he claimed them, the joyous ease of his manner marked a difference and proclaimed a right. After the theatre they came home like this, she thought, and at the same instant she felt his hands on her shoulders and shrank back. "Don't, oh, don't," she cried, drawing her cloak about her. She saw from his astonished stare that her face must be quivering with pain. "Anna! What on earth is the matter?" "Owen knows," she broke out, with a confused desire to justify herself. Darrow's countenance changed. "Did he tell you so?" "What did he say?" "Nothing. I knew it from the things he didn't say." "You had a talk with him this afternoon?" "Yes, for a few minutes. I could see he didn't want me to stay." She had dropped into a chair, and sat there huddled, still holding her cloak about her shoulders. Darrow did not dispute her assumption, and she noticed that he expressed no surprise. He sat down at a little distance from her, turning about in his fingers the cigar case he had drawn out as they came in. At length he said, had he seen Miss Viner? She shrank from the sound of the name. "No. I don't think so." "I'm sure he hadn't." They remained silent, looking away from one another. Finally Darrow stood up and took a few steps across the room. He came back and paused before her, his eyes on her face. "I think you ought to tell me what you mean to do." She raised her head and gave him back his look. "Nothing I do can help Owen." "No, but things can't go on like this." He paused, as if to measure his words. "I fill you with aversion," he exclaimed. She started up, half sobbing. "No, oh, no. Poor child, you can't see your face." She lifted her hands as if to hide it, and turning away from him bowed her head upon the mantel shelf. She felt that he was standing a little way behind her, but he made no attempt to touch her or come nearer. "I know you've felt as I've felt," he said in a low voice, "that we belong to each other and that nothing can alter that. But other thoughts come, and you can't banish them. Whenever you see me you remember, you associate me with things you abhor. You've been generous, immeasurably. You've given me all the chances a woman could, but if it's only made you suffer, what's the use?" She turned to him with a tear-stained face. "It hasn't only done that." "Oh, no. I know. There've been moments." He took her hand and raised it to his lips. "They'll be with me as long as I live. But I can't see you paying such a price for them. I'm not worth what I'm costing you." She continued to gaze at him through tear-dilated eyes, and suddenly she flung out the question, "Wasn't it the Athene you took her to that evening?" "Anna, Anna." "Yes, I want to know now, to know everything. Perhaps that will make me forget." I ought to have made you tell me before. Wherever we go, I imagine you've been there with her. I see you together. I want to know how it began, where you went, why you left her. I can't go on in this darkness any longer. She did not know what had prompted her passionate outburst, but already she felt lighter, freer, as if at last the evil spell were broken. I want to know everything, she repeated. It's the only way to make me forget. After she had ceased speaking, Darrow remained where he was, his arms folded, his eyes lowered, immovable. She waited, her gaze on his face. Aren't you going to tell me? No, the blood rushed to her temples. You won't. Why not? If I did, do you suppose you'd forget that? Oh, she moaned, and turned away from him. You see, it's impossible, he went on. I've done a thing I loathe, and to atone for it you ask me to do another. What sort of satisfaction would that give you? It would put something irremediable between us. She leaned her elbow against the mantel shelf and hid her face in her hands. She had the sense that she was vainly throwing away her last hope of happiness, yet she could do nothing, think of nothing, to save it. The conjecture flashed through her, should I be at peace if I gave him up? And she remembered the desolation of the days after she had sent him away, and understood that that hope was vain. The tears welled through her lids and ran slowly down between her fingers. Goodbye, she heard him say, and his footsteps turned to the door. She tried to raise her head, but the weight of her despair bowed it down. She said to herself, this is the end, he won't try to appeal to me again, and she remained in a sort of tranced rigidity, perceiving without feeling the fateful lapse of the seconds. Then the cords that bound her seemed to snap, and she lifted her head and saw him going. Why, he's mine, he's mine. He's no one else's. His face was turned to her and the look in his eyes swept away all her terrors. She no longer understood what had prompted her senseless outcry, and the mortal sweetness of loving him became again the one real fact in the world. Anna, the next day, woke to a humiliated memory of the previous evening. Darrow had been right in saying that their sacrifice would benefit no one. Yet she seemed dimly to discern that there were obligations not to be tested by that standard. She owed it, at any rate, as much to his pride as to hers to abstain from the repetition of such scenes, and she had learned that it was beyond her power to do so while they were together. Yet when he had given her the chance to free herself, everything had vanished from her mind but the blind fear of losing him, and she saw that he and she were as profoundly and inextricably bound together as two trees with interwoven roots. For a long time she brooded on her plight, vaguely conscious that the only escape from it must come from some external chance. And slowly the occasion shaped itself in her mind. It was Sophie Viner only who could save her, Sophie Viner only who could give her back her lost serenity. She would seek the girl out and tell her that she had given Darrow up, and that step once taken there would be no retracing it, and she would perforce have to go forward alone. Any pretext for action was a kind of anodyne, and she dispatched her maid to the Farlows with a note asking if Miss Viner would receive her. There was a long delay before the maid returned, and when at last she appeared it was with a slip of paper on which an address was written, and a verbal message to the effect that Miss Viner had left some days previously, and was staying with her sister in a hotel near the Place de l'Étoile. The maid added that Mrs. Farlow, on the plea that Miss Viner's plans were uncertain, had at first made some difficulty about giving this information, and Anna guessed that the girl had left her friend's roof, and instructed them to withhold her address, with the object of avoiding Owen. "She's kept faith with herself and I haven't," Anna mused, and the thought was a fresh incentive to action. Darrow had announced his intention of coming soon after luncheon, and the morning was already so far advanced that Anna, still mistrustful of her strength, decided to drive immediately to the address Mrs. Farlow had given. On the way there she tried to recall what she had heard of Sophie Viner's sister, but beyond the girl's enthusiastic report of the absent Laura's loveliness she could remember only certain vague allusions of Mrs. Farlow's to her artistic endowments and matrimonial vicissitudes. Darrow had mentioned her but once, and in the briefest terms, as having apparently very little concern for Sophie's welfare, and being, at any rate, too geographically remote to give her any practical support, and Anna wondered what chance had brought her to her sister's side at this conjunction. Mrs. Farlow had spoken of her as a celebrity, in what line Anna failed to recall, but Mrs. Farlow's celebrities were legion, and the name on the slip of paper, Mrs. McTavish Birch, did not seem to have any definite association with fame. While Anna waited in the dingy vestibule of the Hotel Chicago she had so distinct a vision of what she meant to say to Sophie Viner that the girl seemed already to be before her, and her heart dropped from all the height of its courage when the porter, after a long delay, returned with the announcement that Miss Viner was no longer in the hotel. Anna, doubtful if she understood, asked if he merely meant that the young lady was out at the moment, but he replied that she had gone away the day before. Beyond this he had no information to impart, and after a moment's hesitation Anna sent him back to enquire if Mrs. McTavish Birch would receive her. She reflected that Sophie had probably pledged her sister to the same secrecy as Mrs. Farlow, and that a personal appeal to Mrs. Birch might lead to less negative results. There was another long interval of suspense before the porter reappeared with an affirmative answer, and a third while an exiguous and hesitating lift bore her up past a succession of shabby landings. When the last was reached, and her guide had directed her down a winding passage that smelt of seagoing luggage, she found herself before a door through which a strong odor of tobacco reached her simultaneously with the sounds of a suppressed altercation. Her knock was followed by a silence, and after a minute or two the door was opened by a handsome young man whose ruffled hair and general air of creased disorder led her to conclude that he had just risen from a long-limbed sprawl on a sofa strewn with tumbled cushions. This sofa, and a grand piano bearing a basket of faded roses, a biscuit tin and a devastated breakfast tray, almost filled the narrow sitting room, in the remaining corner of which another man, short, swarthy and humble, sat examining the lining of his hat. Anna paused in doubt, but on her naming Mrs. Birch the young man politely invited her to enter, at the same time casting an impatient glance at the mute spectator in the background. The latter, raising his eyes, which were round and bulging, fixed them, not on the young man but on Anna, whom, for a moment, he scrutinized as searchingly as the interior of his hat. Under his gaze she had the sense of being minutely catalogued and valued, and the impression, when he finally rose and moved toward the door, of having been accepted as a better guarantee than he had had any reason to hope for. On the threshold his glance crossed that of the young man in an exchange of intelligence as full as it was rapid, and this brief scene left Anna so oddly enlightened that she felt no surprise when her companion, pushing an armchair forward, sociably asked her if she wouldn't have a cigarette. Her polite refusal provoked the remark that he would, if she'd no objection, and while he groped for matches in his loose pockets, and behind the photographs and letters crowding the narrow mantel shelf, she ventured another enquiry for Mrs. Birch. "Just a minute," he smiled, "I think the masseur's with her." He spoke in a smooth denationalized English, which, like the look in his long-lashed eyes and the promptness of his charming smile, suggested a long training in all the arts of expediency. Having finally discovered a matchbox on the floor beside the sofa, he lit his cigarette and dropped back among the cushions, and on Anna's remarking that she was sorry to disturb Mrs. Birch he replied that that was all right, and that she always kept everybody waiting. After this, through the haze of his perpetually renewed cigarettes, they continued to chat for some time of indifferent topics, but when at last Anna again suggested the possibility of her seeing Mrs. Birch he rose from his corner with a slight shrug, and murmuring, "She's perfectly hopeless," lounged off through an inner door. Anna was still wondering when and in what conjunction of circumstances the much-married Laura had acquired a partner so conspicuous for his personal charms, when the young man returned to announce, "She says it's all right, if you don't mind seeing her in bed." He drew aside to let Anna pass, and she found herself in a dim untidy scented room, with a pink curtain pinned across its single window, and a lady with a great deal of fair hair and uncovered neck smiling at her from a pink bed on which an immense powder puff trailed. "You don't mind, do you? He costs such a frightful lot that I can't afford to send him off," Mrs. Birch explained, extending a thick-ringed hand to Anna, and leaving her in doubt as to whether the person alluded to were her masseur or her husband. Before a reply was possible there was a convulsive stir beneath the pink expanse, and something that resembled another powder puff hurled itself at Anna with a volley of sounds like the popping of Lilliputian champagne corks. Mrs. Birch, flinging herself forward, gasped out, "If you'd just give him a caramel, there, in that box on the dressing table, it's the only earthly thing to stop him." And when Anna had proffered this sop to her assailant, and he had withdrawn with it beneath the bedspread, his mistress sank back with a laugh. "Isn't he a beauty? The prince gave him to me down at Nice the other day, but he's perfectly awful," she confessed, beaming intimately on her visitor. In the roseate penumbra of the bed curtains she presented to Anna's startled gaze an odd chromo-like resemblance to Sophie Viner, or a suggestion, rather, of what Sophie Viner might, with the years and in spite of the powder puff, become. Larger, blonder, heavier featured, she yet had glances and movements that disturbingly suggested what was freshest and most engaging in the girl, and as she stretched her bare plump arm across the bed she seemed to be pulling back the veil from dingy distances of family history. "Do sit down, if there's a place to sit on," she cordially advised, adding, as Anna took the edge of a chair hung with miscellaneous ornament, "My singing takes so much time that I don't get a chance to walk the fat off. That's the worst of being an artist." Anna murmured an assent. "I hope it hasn't inconvenienced you to see me," I told Mr. Birch. "Mr. who?" the recumbent beauty asked, and then, "Oh, Jimmy," she faintly laughed, as if more for her own enlightenment than Anna's. The latter continued eagerly, "I understand from Mrs. Farlow that your sister was with you, and I ventured to come up because I wanted to ask you when I should have a chance of finding her." Mrs. McTavish Birch threw back her head with a long stare. "Do you mean to say the idiot at the door didn't tell you? Sophie went away last night." "Last night?" Anna echoed. A sudden terror had possessed her. Could it be that the girl had tricked them all and gone with Owen? The idea was incredible, yet it took such hold of her that she could hardly steady her lips to say, "The porter did tell me, but I thought perhaps he was mistaken. Mrs. Farlow seemed to think that I should find her here. It was all so sudden that I don't suppose she had time to let the Farlows know. She didn't get Mrs. Mott's wire till yesterday, and she just pitched her things into a trunk and rushed." "Mrs. Mott?" "Why, yes. Sophie's gone to India with Mrs. Mott. They're to meet at Brindisi," Sophie's sister said with a calm smile. Anna sat motionless, gazing at the disordered room, the pink bed, the trivial face among the pillows. Mrs. McTavish Birch pursued, "They had a fearful kick-up last spring. I dare say you knew about it, but I told Sophie she'd better lump it, as long as the old woman was willing to. As an artist, of course, it's perfectly impossible for me to have her with me." "Of course," Anna mechanically assented. Through the confused pain of her thoughts she was hardly aware that Mrs. Birch's explanations were still continuing. "Naturally I didn't altogether approve of her going back to that beast of a woman. I said all I could. I told her she was a fool to chuck up such a place as yours. But Sophie's restless, always was, and she's taken it into her head she'd rather travel." Anna rose from her seat, groping for some formula of leave-taking. The pushing back of her chair roused the white dog's smouldering animosity, and he drowned his mistress's further confidences in another outburst of hysterics. Through the tumult Anna signed an inaudible farewell, and Mrs. Birch, having momentarily succeeded in suppressing her pet under a pillow, called out, "Do come again. I'd love to sing to you." Anna murmured a word of thanks and turned to the door. As she opened it she heard her hostess crying after her, "Jimmy! Do you hear me?" Jimmy Brance, and then, There being no response from the person summoned, do tell him he must go and call the lift for you. End of the Project Gutenberg ebook. The Reef updated editions will replace the previous one, the old editions will be renamed. Creating the works from print editions not protected by U.S. copyright law means that no one owns a United States copyright in these works, so the Foundation, and you, can copy and distribute it in the United States without permission and without paying copyright royalties. Special rules, set forth in the general terms of use part of this license, apply to copying and distributing Project Gutenberg trademark symbol electronic works to protect the Project Gutenberg trademark symbol concept and trademark. Project Gutenberg is a registered trademark, and may not be used if you charge for an ebook, except by following the terms of the trademark license, including paying royalties for use of the Project Gutenberg trademark. If you do not charge anything for copies of this ebook, complying with the trademark license is very easy. You may use this ebook for nearly any purpose, such as creation of derivative works, reports, performances and research. Project Gutenberg ebooks may be modified and printed and given away. You may do practically anything in the United States with ebooks not protected by U.S. copyright law. Redistribution is subject to the trademark license, especially commercial redistribution. Start. Full license. The full Project Gutenberg license. Please read this before you distribute or use this work to protect the Project Gutenberg trademark symbol mission of promoting the free distribution of electronic works. By using or distributing this work, or any other work associated in any way with the phrase Project Gutenberg, you agree to comply with all the terms of the full Project Gutenberg trademark symbol license available with this file or online at www.gutenberg.org/license. Section 1. General Terms of Use and Redistributing Project Gutenberg Trademark Symbol Electronic Works 1.0. By reading or using any part of this Project Gutenberg trademark symbol electronic work, you indicate that you have read, understand, agree to and accept all the terms of this license and intellectual property, trademark/copyright, agreement. If you do not agree to abide by all the terms of this agreement, you must cease using and return or destroy all copies of Project Gutenberg trademark symbol electronic works in your possession. If you paid a fee for obtaining a copy of or access to a Project Gutenberg trademark symbol electronic work and you do not agree to be bound by the terms of this agreement, you may obtain a refund from the person or entity to whom you paid the fee as set forth in paragraph 1.e.8. 1.b. Project Gutenberg is a registered trademark. It may only be used on or associated in any way with an electronic work by people who agree to be bound by the terms of this agreement. There are a few things that you can do with most Project Gutenberg trademark symbol electronic works even without complying with the full terms of this agreement. See paragraph 1.c below. There are a lot of things you can do with Project Gutenberg trademark symbol electronic works if you follow the terms of this agreement and help preserve free future access to Project Gutenberg trademark symbol electronic works. See paragraph 1.e below. 1.c. The Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation, the Foundation or PGLAF, owns a compilation copyright in the collection of Project Gutenberg trademark symbol electronic works. Nearly all the individual works in the collection are in the public domain in the United States. If an individual work is unprotected by copyright law in the United States and you are located in the United States, we do not claim a right to prevent you from copying, distributing, performing, displaying or creating derivative works based on the work as long as all references to Project Gutenberg are removed. Of course, we hope that you will support the Project Gutenberg trademark symbol mission of promoting free access to electronic works by freely sharing Project Gutenberg trademark symbol works in compliance with the terms of this agreement for keeping the Project Gutenberg trademark symbol name associated with the work. You can easily comply with the terms of this agreement by keeping this work in the same format with its attached full Project Gutenberg trademark symbol license when you share it without charge with others. 1.d. The copyright laws of the place where you are located also govern what you can do with this work. Copyright laws in most countries are in a constant state of change. If you are outside the United States, check the laws of your country in addition to the terms of this agreement before downloading, copying, displaying, performing, distributing or creating derivative works based on this work or any other Project Gutenberg trademark symbol work. The Foundation makes no representations concerning the copyright status of any work in any country other than the United States. 1.e Unless you have removed all references to Project Gutenberg. 1.e.1. The following sentence, with active links to, or other immediate access to, the full Project Gutenberg trademark symbol license must appear prominently whenever any copy of a Project Gutenberg trademark symbol work, any work on which the phrase Project Gutenberg appears, or with which the phrase Project Gutenberg is associated, is accessed, displayed, performed, viewed, copied or distributed. This ebook is for the use of anyone anywhere in the United States and most other parts of the world at no cost and with almost no restrictions whatsoever. You may copy it, give it away or reuse it under the terms of the Project Gutenberg license included with this ebook or online at www.gutenberg.org. If you are not located in the United States, you will have to check the laws of the country where you are located before using this ebook. 1.e.2. If an individual Project Gutenberg trademark symbol electronic work is derived from texts not protected by U.S. copyright law, does not contain a notice indicating that it is posted with permission of the copyright holder, the work can be copied and distributed to anyone in the United States without paying any fees or charges. If you are redistributing or providing access to a work with the phrase Project Gutenberg associated with or appearing on the work, You must comply either with the requirements of paragraphs 1.e.1 through 1.e.7 or obtain permission for the use of the work and the Project Gutenberg trademark symbol trademark as set forth in paragraphs 1.e.8 or 1.e.9. 1.e.3. If an individual Project Gutenberg trademark symbol electronic work is posted with the permission of the copyright holder, your use and distribution must comply with both paragraphs 1.e.1 through 1.e.7 and any additional terms imposed by the copyright holder. Additional terms will be linked to the Project Gutenberg trademark symbol license for all works posted with the permission of the copyright holder found at the beginning of this work. 1.e.4. Do not unlink or detach or remove the full Project Gutenberg trademark symbol license terms from this work, or any files containing a part of this work or any other work associated with Project Gutenberg trademark symbol. 1.e.5. Do not copy, display, perform, distribute or redistribute this electronic work, or any part of this electronic work, without prominently displaying the sentence set forth in paragraph 1.e.1 with active links or immediate access to the full terms of the Project Gutenberg trademark symbol license. 1.e.6. You may convert to and distribute this work in any binary, compressed, marked up, non-proprietary or proprietary form, including any word processing or hypertext form. However, if you provide access to or distribute copies of a Project Gutenberg trademark symbol work in a format other than plain vanilla ASCII or other format used in the official version posted on the official Project Gutenberg trademark symbol website, www.gutenberg.org, you must, at no additional cost, fee or expense to the user, provide a copy, a means of exporting a copy, or a means of obtaining a copy upon request, of the work in its original plain vanilla ASCII or other form. Any alternate format must include the full Project Gutenberg trademark symbol license as specified in paragraph 1.e.1. 1.e.7. Do not charge a fee for access to, viewing, displaying, performing, copying or distributing any Project Gutenberg trademark symbol works unless you comply with paragraph 1.e.8 or 1.e.9. 1.e.8. You may charge a reasonable fee for copies of or providing access to or distributing Project Gutenberg trademark symbol electronic works provided that you pay a royalty fee of 20% of the gross profits you derive from the use of Project Gutenberg trademark symbol works calculated using the method you already use to calculate your applicable taxes. The fee is owed to the owner of the Project Gutenberg trademark symbol trademark, but he has agreed to donate royalties under this paragraph to the Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation. Royalty payments must be paid within 60 days following each date on which you prepare, or are legally required to prepare, your periodic tax returns. Royalty payments should be clearly marked as such and sent to the Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation at the address specified in Section 4, Information about donations to the Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation. You provide a full refund of any money paid by a user who notifies you in writing, or by email, within 30 days of receipt that he does not agree to the terms of the full Project Gutenberg trademark symbol license. You must require such a user to return or destroy all copies of the works possessed in a physical medium and discontinue all use of and all access to other copies of Project Gutenberg trademark symbol works. You provide, in accordance with paragraph 1.f.3, a full refund of any money paid for a work or a replacement copy, if a defect in the electronic work is discovered and reported to you within 90 days of receipt of the work. You comply with all other terms of this agreement for free distribution of Project Gutenberg trademark symbol works. 1.e.9. If you wish to charge a fee or distribute a Project Gutenberg trademark symbol electronic work or group of works on different terms than are set forth in this agreement, you must obtain permission in writing from the Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation, the manager of the Project Gutenberg trademark symbol trademark. Contact the Foundation as set forth in Section 3 below. 1.f1.f.1 Project Gutenberg volunteers and employees expend considerable effort to identify, do copyright research on, transcribe and proofread works not protected by U.S. copyright law in creating the Project Gutenberg trademark symbol collection. Despite these efforts, Project Gutenberg trademark symbol electronic works, and the medium on which they may be stored, may contain defects such as, but not limited to, incomplete, inaccurate or corrupt data, transcription errors, a copyright or other intellectual property infringement, a defective or damaged disk or other medium, a computer virus, or computer codes that damage or cannot be read by your equipment. 1.f.2 Limited warranty, disclaimer of damages, except for the right of replacement or refund described in paragraph 1.f.3, the Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation, the owner of the Project Gutenberg trademark symbol trademark, and any other party distributing a Project Gutenberg trademark symbol electronic work under this agreement, disclaim all liability to you for damages, costs and expenses, including legal fees. You agree that you have no remedies for negligence, strict liability, breach of warranty or breach of contract except those provided in paragraph 1.f.3. You agree that the Foundation, the trademark owner, and any distributor under this agreement will not be liable to you for actual, direct, indirect, consequential, punitive or incidental damages even if you give notice of the possibility of such damage. 1.f.3 Limited right of replacement or refund. If you discover a defect in this electronic work within 90 days of receiving it, you can receive a refund of the money, if any, you paid for it by sending a written explanation to the person you received the work from. If you received the work on a physical medium, you must return the medium with your written explanation. The person or entity that provided you with the defective work may elect to provide a replacement copy in lieu of a refund. If you received the work electronically, the person or entity providing it to you may choose to give you a second opportunity to receive the work electronically in lieu of a refund. If the second copy is also defective, you may demand a refund in writing without further opportunities to fix the problem. 1.f.4 Except for the limited right of replacement or refund set forth in paragraph 1.f.3, this work is provided to you as is, with no other warranties of any kind, express or implied, including but not limited to warranties of merchantability or fitness for any purpose. 1.f.5 Some states do not allow disclaimers of certain implied warranties or the exclusion or limitation of certain types of damages. If any disclaimer or limitation set forth in this agreement violates the law of the state applicable to this agreement, the agreement shall be interpreted to make the maximum disclaimer or limitation permitted by the applicable state law. The invalidity or unenforceability of any provision of this agreement shall not void the remaining provisions. 1.f.6 Indemnity. You agree to indemnify and hold the foundation, the trademark owner, any agent or employee of the foundation, anyone providing copies of Project Gutenberg trademark symbol electronic works in accordance with this agreement, and any volunteers associated with the production, promotion and distribution of Project Gutenberg trademark symbol electronic works, harmless from all liability, costs and expenses, including legal fees, that arise directly or indirectly from any of the following which you do or cause to occur. A. Distribution of this or any Project Gutenberg trademark symbol work. B. Alteration, modification, or additions or deletions to any Project Gutenberg trademark symbol work, and C. Any defect you cause. Section 2. Information about the mission of Project Gutenberg trademark symbol. Project Gutenberg trademark symbol is synonymous with the free distribution of electronic works in formats readable by the widest variety of computers, including obsolete, old, middle-aged and new computers. It exists because of the efforts of hundreds of volunteers and donations from people in all walks of life. Volunteers and financial support to provide volunteers with the assistance they need are critical to reaching Project Gutenberg trademark symbol's goals and ensuring that the Project Gutenberg trademark symbol collection will remain freely available for generations to come. In 2001, the Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation was created to provide a secure and permanent future for Project Gutenberg trademark symbol and future generations. To learn more about the Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation and how your efforts and donations can help, see sections 3 and 4 and the Foundation information page at www.gutenberg.org. Section 3. Information about the Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation. The Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation is a non-profit 501(c)(3) educational corporation organized under the laws of the state of Mississippi and granted tax-exempt status by the Internal Revenue Service. The Foundation's IN or Federal Tax Identification Number is 64-6221541. Contributions to the Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation are tax-deductible to the full extent permitted by U.S. federal laws and your state's laws. The Foundation's business office is located at 809 North 1500 West, Salt Lake City, UT 84116, 801-596-1887. Email contact links and up-to-date contact information can be found at the Foundation's website and official page at www.gutenberg.org/contact section 4. Information about donations to the Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation. Project Gutenberg trademark symbol depends upon and cannot survive without widespread public support and donations to carry out its mission of increasing the number of public domain and licensed works that can be freely distributed in machine-readable form accessible by the widest array of equipment, including outdated equipment. Many small donations, $1 to $5,000, are particularly important to maintaining tax-exempt status with the IRS. The Foundation is committed to complying with the laws regulating charities and charitable donations in all 50 states of the United States. Compliance requirements are not uniform and it takes a considerable effort, much paperwork and many fees to meet and keep up with these requirements. We do not solicit donations in locations where we have not received written confirmation of compliance. To send donations or determine the status of compliance for any particular state, visit www.gutenberg.org/donate. While we cannot and do not solicit contributions from states where we have not met the solicitation requirements, we know of no prohibition against accepting unsolicited donations from donors in such states who approach us with offers to donate. International donations are gratefully accepted, but we cannot make any statements concerning tax treatment of donations received from outside the United States. U.S. laws alone swamp our small staff. Please check the Project Gutenberg web pages for current donation methods and addresses. Donations are accepted in a number of other ways, including checks, online payments and credit card donations. To donate, please visit www.gutenberg.org/donate. Section 5. General information about Project Gutenberg trademark symbol electronic works. Professor Michael S. Hart was the originator of the Project Gutenberg trademark symbol concept of a library of electronic works that could be freely shared with anyone. For 40 years, he produced and distributed Project Gutenberg trademark symbol ebooks with only a loose network of volunteer support. Project Gutenberg trademark symbol ebooks are often created from several printed editions, all of which are confirmed as not protected by copyright in the U.S. unless a copyright notice is included. Thus, we do not necessarily keep ebooks in compliance with any particular paper edition. Most people start at our website, which has the main PG search facility, www.gutenberg.org. This website includes information about Project Gutenberg trademark symbol, including how to make donations to the Project Gutenberg Literary Archive Foundation, how to help produce our new ebooks, and how to subscribe to our email newsletter to hear about new ebooks.